Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ryan, and welcome to Central Park. We're happy to continue bringing the park to you through a handful of virtual programs as well as in-person programs. And we're very thankful today to have you joining us for another weekly walk. These series, of course, being virtual tours where we show you photos of the park from this current season. And today we're going to be taking an interesting little walk, a weekly walk titled Sledding in the Park with me, Ryan, on today, February 22nd, 2023. Now, as we begin our walk, thank you again for your continued support of us here at the Central Park Conservancy. Our mission here at the Central Park Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all, something that we couldn't do without the help from the public, such as yourselves. As we do make our way through the park today, please feel free to use the chat feature to say hello. Please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions you might have. And when I share some visitor polls, please vote in those, and then we can share the results and see what everybody is thinking. The last thing you'll see that will pop up are going to be some closed captions, which I am turning on just right now. So in just a moment, you'll start to see those captions being displayed. If you do want to not have those captions displayed, you can go to the little CC icon or live transcript option on the bottom, and you can disable those. But thank you again so much for joining us today. Let's start making our way into the park as we take our Sledding in Central Park walk. A little interesting given the current climate here in New York, but depending where you're joining us from, you might be experiencing some snow or something close to. So a few people in the chat mentioning that they're getting a little bit of maybe sleet or interesting weather right now. And actually a lot of areas throughout the United States are currently going to be experiencing some interesting weather this week, either snowfall or potentially unseasonably warm weather. But let's begin our walk here in Central Park at East 72nd Street. Now, as we make our way into the park, we're walking into what feels like more of a spring climate rather than a winter one, but we'll still be able to enjoy this beautiful sunny day as we make our way into the park and discuss a little bit about sledding, an activity that leads to over 20,000 injuries amongst children and teenagers each year, according to a 2010 analysis. However, it does not stop, of course, the spirit of people looking to come and engage with this thrill-seeking adventure or activity here in the park. But more on that later. For now, we'll start making our way into the park and we can enjoy what, again, feels like more of a spring day. As we make our way just a short walk into the park, we might be able to notice something on some of the trees and shrubs, some flowers starting to occur. We're seeing actually some early spring blooms already starting to bloom and blossom now, especially after that about 60-degree weather we had just the other week. Here we can see some cornelian cherry dogwood starting to bloom. Cornelian cherry dogwoods are amongst the first or some of the earlier spring blooms we start to see in the park, capturing a little bit of that nice yellow and a precursor to some of the other brighter colors that are yet to come in just a few weeks or maybe a few months, depending if we get some later snowfall. But as we make our way into the park, we can see everybody is out in the park today. We have kids, mothers, dogs, and a lot of other people in between. As we make our way through the park, we can, of course, stop at a visitor kiosk like this one at 72nd and 5th Avenue, or another one at 72nd and 8th Avenue, give us a free map and provide us a little bit of insight into our journey into the park. But today is a beautiful day, so we can just wander around and enjoy the park freely. Instead of taking one of the pedestrians down or one of the pedestrian paths down this area of the park, we'll walk out onto the lawn, a lawn that's pretty familiar, one known as Pilgrim Hill, and we'll see why in just a few moments. Walking out onto Pilgrim Hill, we can come to one of the park's best, I guess that's more of an opinionated statement, but one of the park's best sledding hills to come to. This hill attracts people throughout various seasons for quite a few reasons, but during the wintertime, the quite elevated hillside over here in long distance provides kids a wonderful, and adults, a wonderful little track to go sledding or sleigh riding on. And actually the view we see here is obstructed by a little fence. This isn't even the full extent of the hill that you can sled down. But looking around here, we can see where this hill gets its name from. Known as Pilgrim Hill today, it would get that nickname after this statue. The Pilgrim statue would be dedicated on June 6, 1885. This is coming as a gift from the New England Society of New York. and of course, helping to issue the name of this hill that has become a favorite for sleigh riding, as well as for cherry blossom viewing. Again, it feels like a spring day out there today, and this weather is really making us look forward to some of the other blooms that are going to follow the Cornelian cherry dogwoods, like, of course, Kwanzan and Yoshino cherry blossoms. Here we can see some of the Yoshino cherry blossoms that make Pilgrim Hill a favorite destination during the spring season. Looking at that statue, we can see what's to come in just, again, anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. Much like the unpredictable weather, predicting when cherry blossoms and other blooms are going to occur is a guessing game entirely. But of course, we can enjoy the beauty that we have on our current day, which again is a winter day, but still feels a little bit warm and spring-like. From up here, though, we can imagine what this area would look like after a fresh snowfall. The photo here from 2020 shows just what this landscape looked like a few years ago after a nice blanketing of snow covered the area. We see this being one of the most premier spots for people to come sledding. And sledding, as we may have learned a few weeks ago on one of our other winter weekly walks, is a favorite activity that's occurred since the 19th century. We see sledding being very popular. And we actually see during the 19th and early 20th century, New York City officials really urging people to come to the park to go sledding. Sledding was actually an encouraged activity, especially in parks, because the alternative was on the streets, which was very dangerous. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of accidents occurring between about 1909 and 1920 involving children and unfortunately a lot of automobiles. So we do see a big urge to go sledding in parks occurring, especially during the early 1900s. And actually, we see a couple articles talking about the really fun activity that could be had in parks. A New York Tribune article from 1910 was quoted as saying, "Snow from the sidewalks around Hamilton Fish, DeWitt Clinton, and East River parks has been thrown over the fences to form an embankment from which the youngsters can coast." And we often see coasting being the name for sledding and sleigh riding during this time. Another quote from that same article read, "In Central Park, never before were so many coasters in evidence." As we see many snowstorms in the early 20th century, blanketing the park and making this a favorite and beloved activity for quite some time. And of course, many historic photos we can see, like this one from February 6, 1914, help to show the excitement that would occur in Central Park after a little bit of snow has blanketed the ground. We can also observe some of the various types of sled and equipment that people would start using. We do see sledding being, of course, very popular, but initially in the late 19th century and early 20th century, we often see the wealthier class being more accessible to the activity of sledding. However, that would change in the early 20th century when we start to see more affordable, flexible flyers and different types of individual sleds, as well as kind of cheaper knockoffs or recreations being distributed, allowing for, of course, a whole different class of people to be able to come and engage in this activity. This newspaper article from the Evening World from December 4th, 1914, shows one of the examples of the flexible flyers that could be purchased. These were pretty advanced for their time, as they did have different directional types of levers on them, allowing you to actually steer rather than just jumping on the sleigh and crossing your fingers for a safe landing. We do see many of these models helping to encourage activities like sleigh riding or coasting, as it was called, in parks like Central Park. Today, as we walk around the park, of course, it's kind of warm out there. Today is a little bit chillier, but we're not really seeing any snow. The kids today in New York City would probably have better luck of sleigh riding on a wheeled contraption like this, something that was often done during the summer months, probably helping to maybe get people's excitement built for the future winter season that'll provide sleigh riding without the use of wheels. But photos like this from the early 1900s, this one coming around 1919, shows how many fun activities sleigh riding provided during all seasons. As we start to make our way back to present time, we can of course see that this area does not have too much snow, or rather any snow on it today. Actually, it looks kind of more like a beach than it does a snow riding hill today. But if we flash back to the past, we can think a little bit about what this area looks like. This photo might look kind of familiar. This is actually from an older weekly walk that I took us on. This is from a weekly walk titled Hill to Hill, which actually occurred around this time last year, back in February. I'm actually blanking on the exact date that occurred upon, but we can see the transformation of present day time to what this looks like after a fresh snowfall. We'll actually see an example of a photo like this in a little bit. But for now, we can notice really just how different the current landscape looks. Pilgrim Hill is a little bit kind of split down the middle. Looks like Two-Face from the Batman series. And what we can see here is one side a little bit more worn down and another side with a little bit fresher turf. And that's because the more south end section, or rather, sorry, the more north section of Pilgrim Hill is currently closed for some restoration. You'll see during the winter a lot of lawn restoration in progress. Doing this, of course, during the winter when these landscapes are lesser utilized and kind of lesser important because we're not really looking at picnic during a typically cold season, allows us to better care for these different areas of the park that otherwise experience a lot of compaction from millions of people's feet clumping over them, as well as, of course, really tackle some of these projects during the slower season. But restoring this area, we see new turf being laid down, and this area being temporarily fenced off so we can let the lawn and turf really seed back in. And of course, we can see many areas that are ready to go. If we do get snowfall, some of these areas like Pilgrim Hill will be opened up to allow sledding to return. And we do see, of course, our classic hay bales blocking out any hard landing spots like lampposts or trees that a coasting sledder might be heading right for. As we make our way a little bit past this area, we're going to head north and we'll head to another more famed, or maybe not more famed, but a more preferred by me, sledding hill in Central Park. As we make our way just north, we'll wrap around the conservatory water for a little while, and we'll enjoy some of the beautiful views we get along the way. Again, enjoying everybody that's out in the park, from dogs to people to plenty of wildlife, like this little European starling who's doing a nice little high balance walk across this area of the conservatory lake. I always love seeing these photos that kind of capture motion as we can see this bird walking on down the path. But as we make our way by, we'll walk the opposite direction of this little European starling, and we'll start heading more north past the conservatory water. As we head up here, though, we can notice something along the way. We'll point out these two trees just to our left side. Actually, more recently, in the past few weeks, I've been getting this question a lot. What's that tree over there on the left? That tree over there on the left is going to be a London plane tree. London plane trees are crosses between American sycamore and Oriental plane trees, naturally hybridized back in the 1700s, found over in London, England, and spread throughout many urban areas because of their hardiness and their aptitude at dealing with a lot of different urban challenges. We see this being a really beautiful tree that has a camouflage style bark. And it can be pretty easily separated from the American sycamore that it is kind of partially developed from. We see London planes having more of an olive kind of yellow color to them, whereas if we look at an American sycamore, the bottom of it is going to be a lot more furrowed before it starts becoming patchy. We can see this American sycamore just to the right of the London plane having, again, more of a furrowed or more of a kind of crumply type of bark surrounding it rather than that patchy bark we saw earlier. If we were to look up the tree another 5 feet, we'd start to see a similar camouflage type of pattern similar to the London plane. But we can distinguish the American sycamore because it has more of a blue or silvery color as compared to that kind of olive yellow color of the London plane. But enough about these trees. We'll walk a little bit further up. Actually, let's take a look at one more other tree that's sticking out. But before we do that, I do just want to share the first poll, one that is specifically more of a sleigh or coasting type of poll. And this is simple, choose your ride. If you were to have at your disposal all of these sleigh riding options available, which would be the sleigh that you would choose? Or maybe none of these would be, and you decide on another option. If you do pick other, please let me know in the chat, because I'd love to hear what else you would use to get down a snowy mountain beyond this. Of course, I did include skis or snowboards, so that might be one of the options. But as we let everybody vote in that, we'll check out a tree that is sticking out to me just over on the middle right of this photo. Looking out to our right, we come to an interesting tree. It's a Turkish filbert. I doubt that many people in here have heard of that tree before. I certainly haven't before I came to Central Park. This tree is an interesting one that you may have guessed is not indigenous to North America. The Turkish filbert, otherwise known as a Turkish hazel, is more native to Southeast Europe and Southwest Asia, found in areas like Turkey. This tree, really pretty to see during this time because of some of the features hanging from its branches. These kind of look like maybe more stiff cones, like a pine cone, but they're actually softer and they're known as catkins. Catkins are actually just elongated clusters of flowers that form. They're really interesting, typically dispersing pollen through wind dispersal as wind blow these nice little catkins around. But during this time, it provides a nice little view on this tree, as many of the other deciduous trees, of course, don't have any leaves or any flowers presently on them. So it adds a nice little aesthetic to our view along this area of the park. And as you wrap around this area, you might notice countless beautiful trees, many of which have plaques telling you both the common and scientific name here as you adventure around. As we adventure just a little bit north of here, we'll actually take a moment to appreciate some of the cornelian cherries we can see, like that little patch on the right side of this photo. And as we make our way just a little bit up the path, we can see one of the about 30 ornamental bridges and arches found in Central Park today, this one being Glade Arch. Before we head to the top of Glade Arch, let's share that poll and let's see what everybody was deciding to pick for their sleigh of choice. So it looks like most people are going to go with the classic, the flexible flyer. It's a good choice because, as we mentioned, that one does have different levers that allow you to choose direction. Unlike the majority of the other options on here, which you just basically have to kind of jump on and cross your fingers and hope for the best, we do see that one having a little bit more better of an option in terms of moving and changing direction. But we do see, I think, toboggan looks like it's going to be the second best option, which I have never ridden a toboggan. I think out of this, when I was younger, I did a lot of inflatable tube type of sailing, easy to store once you, of course, release all the air, and pretty durable too. But a lot of amazing options. I'm looking forward to see what people that chose other would choose to get down to Snowy Hill. I'll peep the chat in a little bit and see what everybody decided for that. But for now, let's keep exploring as we make our way to the top of Glade Arch. And as we head up here, we'll make our way just to the right and then take a quick wrap around to the left. But once we get to the top of the path, of course, more bright cornelian cherry dogwoods are blooming, adding a little bit of yellow to this otherwise green area, which features a lot of beautiful evergreen trees we can see just along the background. As we make our way up, though, we'll notice one other thing. The other more famed sledding hill in Central Park is, much like Pilgrim Hill, undergoing some lawn restoration. Again, the winter is a great time to take care of these lawns. In fact, if you join us next week, we'll talk a little bit about winter lawn care and how our turf care teams help to support Central Park, primarily the green grass that we especially love during the warmer months of summer. But for now, we can make our way just over to Glade Arch and walk on top of this arch. Might be wondering why it's had a little different traffic coming on top of it. The traffic that once passed through the top of Glade Arch was actually horse-drawn carriage traffic, as this was once an entranceway that connected to Fifth Avenue, allowing horse-drawn carriages to come in and enter the East Side Carriage Drive just along the very background of this photo. We can see this eventually being changed into a pedestrian pathway, which is why we see this extended large plaza on top. Again, at one point being large enough to take horse-drawn carriages through this area. Today, it's a little bit more quieter, but we can still notice the separation of different types of paving stones over here. This being a beautiful little area to take a rest or enjoy some of the other architecture of the various balustrades and different sides of the arch itself. As we make our way just over Glade Arch, we'll come towards our ending general location, a favorite landscape of mine, not only just for sledding and riding, but just for walking around, for enjoying and picnicking on. We'll make our way a little bit further up to Cedar Hill, which features not only plenty of beautiful cedar trees, but various types of evergreen trees. We can see what is featured actually just here in the middle, a Japanese cryptomeria, otherwise known as a red cedar or a shugi. These are some of my favorite evergreen trees to see in the park, creating a beautiful kind of not cylindrical, but a kind of beautiful cone shape, very symmetrical in its shaping. A very beautiful tree to see. One that we can't see too close by. And the reason we can't make our way onto this landscape right now is, again, because of some restoration that is occurring. We do see many lawns being closed off during this winter to allow them to rest. However, the lawn will reopen for winter activities if we have at least 6 inches or more of snowfall. Something that seems like a bit of a fever dream at this point in the winter season, but fingers crossed, you never know. Maybe some of the kids of New York will get to experience a snowfall like this. We do see quite a few incredible photos of what action looks like here in Central Park after a snowstorm. In fact, one of my favorite weekly walks I ever got to participate in and show you were photos like this, which came from this was from a weekly walk titled The Weather in Central Park, which occurred on February 2nd, 2022. So pretty amazing to think about that a year and about 3 weeks ago, this is what Central Park looked like. Very different than the current weather we're of course experiencing. But during that time, we were able to see really just how incredible this area gets. Coming, I think, just a day or two after that snowstorm, we're able to see how this path just in between Cedar Hill and the lower lying lawn actually gets closed off to vehicular traffic. And we do put up some warnings for anybody walking by that this is an active sledding zone, allowing people to go from the very top of the hill all the way down to the very bottom crest of the hill near Fifth Avenue. One of the longer stretches of sledding area in the entirety of the park. I think Pilgrim Hill has a little bit higher of elevation in some areas, but this I think is going to be the longest and one of the funnest areas to go sledding. Coming over here during the storm allowed us to capture again a lot of incredible photos and show you just how really jam-packed and how popular Central Park is during the winter season, a season we often associate with the park being empty, kind of cold and dreary. But of course, after a snowfall, it is quite the opposite. Beyond seeing some of these incredible kind of just pop-ups of sledding, we also see some very interesting and incredible forms of sleds being used. Anybody that's ever witnessed sleigh riding in New York City before will probably be able to attest to the creativity of different types of sleds that are being used. We can see in an article from the New York Times, which this photo is featured from, coming from 2014, showing just a handful of some of the incredible sleds that people have used. In fact, if you do check the chat, I'll have my colleague Desiree on the back end share an article about these interesting sleds that were featured in this New York Times article, where you can see people using what look like maybe hamster bins, maybe some pieces of cardboard, and maybe even getting a little bit more creative and using whatever that is. But we can see a lot of interesting forms of getting down the hill. Of course, beyond just the flexible flyers, today we've seen sledding really advance to have almost everything, even types of sleds and materials that I'm not even familiar with. But of course, any way you get down without hurting yourself is a great way to enjoy a park landscape during the winter season. As we flash back to, again, February 2nd of 2022, we can see just really the amazing spirit that exists in Central Park after a snowstorm. I think this is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken in Central Park. It really, I think, just highlights the incredible diverse use of the park, the people that use the park, ranging from, of course, the youth, the people that have experienced the park over many decades, even when it wasn't at its greatest. But I think this just shows the life that exists, even during a season we see as otherwise being kind of cold, dreary, and boring otherwise. But of course, coming to an area like this after some snowfall is anything but boring. As we flash back to current day, February 22nd, 2023, we can see that, of course, this area looks quite the opposite of how it looked just a year and 3 weeks ago. Looking over this area today, though, we can notice Cedar Hill kind of looks more like a beach than it does a sleighing hill. We can see a lot of sand occurring on Cedar Hill, as well as a flashback to what this hill looks like again after a nice snowstorm. The photo I'm showing on the right being a photo from, again, that February 2nd, 2022 weekly walk I took you on, titled "The Weather in Central Park Is." If you would like to view that weekly walk, my colleague Desiree will share in the chat box the YouTube link to that weekly walk. Again, that weekly walk has some incredible photos on it, ranging from this winter storm to some kind of before and after as well. But as we look at the lawn today, we'll notice there is no sledding occurring, but rather a lot of sand existing on here. And you might be wondering, why is there so much sand on the grass? And that's for good reason. Again, it's part of our lawn care during this winter time. But putting sand on this grass will help to, one, fill in some of those low-lying areas that otherwise might create dips and drops. And it will also help to kind of diversify the soil. Oftentimes, when too much organic material exists in the soil, it can create kind of a spongy type of soil. So by adding some non-organic materials to it, we can get a nice mix, creating a healthier, loamier soil. If you want to learn a little bit more about how we're caring for the lawns, again, tune in next week because I'm going to be taking you on a weekly walk titled Winter Tree Care, Winter Lawn Care in Central Park. As we snap back, though, we can notice a feature that is beautiful on Cedar Hill, no matter the season, whether there be snow or no snow. And that's some of the incredible evergreen trees on Cedar Hill. Even though this is called Cedar Hill, the trees we're looking at here are spruce trees. They are going to be Norway spruce trees, trees that are very common to be found in the park today, and trees that are pretty familiar to us because they're the ones that are used for the Rockefeller Christmas tree every year. But as we come a little bit further beyond the trees, we can enjoy the shade they're creating, as well as see that beautiful silhouette they cast along the sky. Looking up in the trees, you can notice some interesting things hanging out up there, but not these trees, rather the trees actually just over to the east from here. Looking up in the trees, I see something that is drawing my attention. It's not that little patch of leaves, though, that we might see there in the middle. It's actually something over to the left. Looking in the tree just above the path, there's actually something looks like hanging out up top there. A lot of the people walking just below this tree don't seem to notice the kind of hidden in plain sight creature that is hanging out up there. Anybody see it? If you look a little bit closer, you might be able to notice it a little bit better now. Anybody see what that is yet? Can you tell? Kind of looks like maybe a wart or bump on the tree. Well, what we're seeing there is not a lost cat that made its way up this tree, but rather we're seeing one of the park's larger, more common mammals to exist in the park, a raccoon. Raccoons, of course, are very active in Central Park, and many times we tend to think seeing one during the day means that raccoon is sick. That's actually not the case. Like many animals, raccoons are both diurnal and nocturnal, meaning they're active during the day and during the night. However, they're most active during the night. So we do see animals like this still being active, although this one is not really moving around. It's kind of just hanging out. We do see, especially during the summer months, many raccoons coming out of their tree cavities after it gets very warm, giving them an opportunity to cool off a little bit. And based on the weather we were having on this walk, it feels like a spring day. I'm imagining this raccoon was getting a little too warm, cramped up in the tree cavities with probably a few other raccoons, and instead decided to come and air out a little bit. But as you're walking around Central Park, it's an important reminder that we're walking in the home of many types of wildlife that utilize this park. And of course, even though we might not have the winter we're seeing, doesn't mean there's any less exciting features to see in Central Park. I always like to tell people, remember, when you come to Central Park, look up, down, left, right, and all around, because you never know what you're going to see or who you're going to see. As we can see here, an image of a much more clear photo of a raccoon in a tree in Central Park back in 2011. But as you walk throughout the park during this unseasonably warm winter time, keep an eye out of the trees and you never know who you're going to find. As we come to the end of our walk today, I hope this no snow sledding in Central Park weekly walk was enjoyable to you and you learned a little bit about some of these landscapes you may have seen plenty of times before. We hope snow will arrive in Central Park in the coming weeks to allow some of the youth and, of course, people of all ages to engage in this historic activity, which began back in the 19th century, really picked up speed in the 20th century, and continues today when weather is appropriate to provide a fun, lovable activity here in the park. Here, of course, we can see the route we've ventured on today. And of course, there are plenty of other ways to engage with the park through some of the park's tree walks, through plenty of our different self-guided tours on the website, and of course, plenty of in-person tours ranging from not only environmental environmental science-based tours, but also historic tours and everything in between. Be on the lookout for our specialty tour coming out next month in March, which is going to be Hidden History Women in Central Park. It's a really amazing tour, and you can see quite a few dates on there. Beyond just the March dates, which are going to be celebrating Women's History Month, we also have a Mother's Day date on there. If you'd like to hold off a little bit until May, we're taking this tour. But of course, check on our website or in the link to find information on tours like this. My colleague Desiree will share the link to Hidden History Women in Central Park in the chat for anybody that's interested now. And as we, of course, do come to the end of our walk, we want to thank you for joining us and supporting us here in the park. Of course, keeping the park clean and green is no easy task, and we couldn't do it without you. So thanks for your continued support and caring for the park and for learning about it, like on these weekly walks. I'll see you next Wednesday as I take you on a winter lawn care here at Central Park. I will keep the room open as well for a few more minutes in case there are any last minute questions we haven't had the opportunity to answer. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. And from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe, be well, and see you soon. Take care, everybody.